Hello, hello everyone. Hello to James in the chat room. Always first in line. Always great to see you. As you can see, it's just me tonight. I believe if you caught the jokes episode on Sunday on a special day and time, then you already know that. But if you didn't, here I am. Rob is out for the evening, and here I am. And I have a pretty good topic. I think I put some thought into this one. So, um, some quick housekeeping, just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Of course, there's the new episode tonight. The audio podcast that's on Spreaker that gets put on my Spider Does Things YouTube just finished its second season. That episode was live on Tuesday. It was a day late. And so that will be going on a hiatus for a month, just like the end of season one. And it will be back on New Year's Day, January 1st, 2024, for season three. Okay? In the meantime, all kinds of good content still. We've got this show every Friday, and we have everything else that I have on my channel, Spider Does Things. If you want the tastings, if you want the robots, and if you want anything else. So, tonight, animals and the supernatural, or the paranormal, however you'd prefer to say it. Now, we have talked extensively on this show about cryptids and mysterious alien creatures and monsters and all kinds of things. We have not very often, if at all, talked about standard domestic animals or even just wild animals that are just relatively normal as opposed to like ghostly spiritual things, um, and their relationship with paranormal and supernatural things. Now, some of these, of course, are our pets, like the cats, and cats have had a long historical connection to paranormal things throughout our history. We've revered cats in different cultures and have assigned them sometimes ominous and sometimes beneficial traits on the spirit worlds. Dogs also have been known to have connections, but we have a lot of other things too. Like there's signs in nature that you'll see when things aren't quite right with the world. You'll notice the birds and the insects and different animals will act different ways, and we're going to examine some of that tonight, and we're going to see what we can see. And there's also, of course, the ever present, since the 40s at least, it has been a case study of things like cattle mutilations. And before then, there were always cases of predators and things getting into. When I say predators, I mean not the sci-fi alien, of course, but like a wolf or a coyote or something like that, mountain lion, getting into pastures and attacking and dragging off a member of a herd or even a sheep or something like that. But when we talk about cattle mutilations, we're talking specifically about things that have been done to the animal that don't seem to have any particular purpose towards survival. They seem to have just been either done because it could be done or done from a research standpoint, whether we understand what the research was supposed to be. But it's not a case of, hey, I'm an animal, I'm going to creep in here and attack this cow for meat or to eat. There's no rhyme or reason. So we're talking specifically about that. I want to make that distinction. So let's examine this a little bit. Let's start off. Of course, I got my cats here. Let's start off with cats. We know that cats were revered by the ancient Egyptians. There were domesticated cats around at the time, not like our house cats per se, but they had domesticated animals that were cats. They had Bast, who was a goddess, who was primarily a feline featured goddess. And oftentimes, if a royal household had a cat, or really any of their pets, it happened with a lot of different species, but cats were pretty common. If a royal household had a cat as a pet and a member of the household of certain importance passed away, then the animal would be euthanized and embalmed with the person to prepare them for the afterlife. So it was believed, of course, that they would want companionship for one in the afterlife, but also that they would make use of the animal's special gifts in the underworld, because cats were believed to be able to see into the spirit world. They were supposed to be able to interact with spirits. And so it was good to have them around. Now, over time, the role of the cat, other than just being a house pet, has changed. During the Middle Ages and onwards into the infamous witch trials, cats were believed to be a common familiar for a witch or a sorcerer. What that means is that those cats were not supposed to be natural animals. They were supposed to actually have been either a dark spirit or a demon or some other malevolent creature that had taken the form of a cat in order to blend in a normal household of a witch or warlock or sorcerer. And they could be used to interact with spirits on that level, or to attack one's enemies, or to do all sorts of different things. Now, my cats, as most people who have domestic cats now understand, my cats are lazy. They won't even chase mice. They will sometimes attack flies in the summer or a moth that might get in the house. But it's hard to imagine that they would in any way have some kind of malevolent, like, I'm going to get up and serve the Dark Masters kind of vibe to them, because they simply don't. Now, that isn't to say that they have you ever, if you're a cat owner out there, or any pet owner, honestly, but since right now we're talking about cats first, have you ever noticed sometimes they'll just pick a spot in the air and they'll just stare at it, real intent, real just like, and you can't tell if they're calm or if they're on guard or if they're just like they're just very seriously staring at it. And you'll look over and you'll try to figure out what they're looking at. Could it be a reflection on a window, or could it be a bug flying around, or could it be another cat or something? And sometimes there's just absolutely nothing there, and they're staring at it, real serious. You dismiss it. You're just kind of like, well, whatever. Could be a spirit. Could be something in your house. And maybe they don't take action because it's something that's not going to bother you. Or maybe they don't take action because of the fact that they're looking at it, they're giving it, they're like, you better stay on your best behavior, and this is my house, kind of thing, you know? Now, as far as familiars went, there were other animals that could be used as a familiar, at least according to the people holding the witch trials. They would say all kinds of things. Supposedly a toad, or a ferret, or a mink, or a rat, or a mouse. All of these things could be familiars because they were all considered things that weren't naturally found as a pet in someone's house, even though cats were pretty common because they chased mice, they kept rats down, so that, part of the reason the Black Plague spread out of control is because it was spread by rats, And one of the reasons that the rats had spread was because something had happened to the cats. I think there had been some kind of a law instead, like can't have any cats in the city or something like that. So it was some nonsense law that they had become a nuisance, so they were getting rid of them. Or it was something to do with they believed they were all part of witchcraft, and so the cats were conspicuously absent, so they couldn't chase the rats, and the rats went crazy with their breeding, and they spread the Black Plague. So, interesting factoid for you. And so cats and familiars. Now, Bast, to put some context into this, I'm going to pull up some articles. Bastet, or Bast, depending. You can call it. The Egyptian gods and goddesses had multiple names generally, Bastet or Bast. And she was worshipped as early as the Second Dynasty. And of course, her head, as depicted in Egyptian art, was as a cat, but not a lion, as you may expect from people around the time. Being in North Africa, the Middle East, you would think, oh, maybe it's a lion or something. No, it's actually a cat, which tells you how important cats themselves were. Now, they say that she was originally a lioness goddess, the same as Sekhmet, who was the other cat goddess. Eventually, they were supposed to be two aspects of the same goddess. And Bast was supposed to be more of a gentler form, because cats in general are gentler creatures. Yes, they can be kind of vicious and they claw the crap out of me all the time. I have claw marks all over my arm. But in general, there's a reason we keep them as pets, and they're generally very nice. So, interesting stuff. And again, they were supposed to be able to see into the spirit world. Now, moving on to our other primary pet that we usually keep into our house, which is dogs. Now, dogs, depending on how scientific you believe, may have evolved from wolves in the wilderness and been domesticated, or they might have started from some primarily different species that we just had forgotten about as a people. But dogs have been known to react to strange circumstances or spirits, according to studies. Now, an interesting one, when I looked this up, I didn't expect to find a lot of serious sources, because when you look up this stuff, you find all kinds of things that, it sounds factual, it sounds pretty good, but it's hard to verify. This is an article that came from Psychology Today, and it was written by a man with a PhD and some doctorates back in 2017. The article was called "Can Dogs Detect Ghosts, Spirits, or Hallucinations?" And it has the tagline that dogs can actually be trained to alert someone to their owner's hallucinations, which is helpful in schizophrenia and things of that nature, which is very interesting. I did not know that. I did not know that. But the article, it's pretty good, and it's a pretty, like, Psychology Today, the field of psychology is kind of up and down. Sometimes there's a lot of good stuff that they learn, and sometimes there's a lot of other stuff that they throw in there, depending on the political leanings of the day and whatnot. This was from 2017. And it's based on the paranormal idea that dogs can see spirits, and then it goes from there. And it cites things like the Associated Press and a poll. Apparently, a poll around this time, it did telephone interviews with 1,000 pet owners in the U.S., and it found, among other things, that 47% of dog owners reported that at some time or another their dog alerted them to bad news that was on the way. Um, it tried to find a hiding in a safe space, whining or whimpering, hyperactive or erratic behavior, or barking persistently just prior to something bad happening. And this is another theme that's come up with dogs. Um, we have all kinds of ghost stories and things where when there's things going on outside in the house, they'll whine or they'll be like, there's something happening, whether before you can see anything that's happening. And in our various movies and TV shows, when there's like a spirit or a monster or a demon masquerading as a person, the dogs can tell. They know something's not natural. And most of the time, sometimes they'll growl and they'll be aggressive, but a lot of times they'll back off because they don't want anything to do with that. And that is a thing that many of us who've had dogs have probably experienced. Now, my dog, of course, unfortunately, she's kind of crazy. And I don't say that in like a derogatory way. I just mean that she's not quite all there anymore. She's mostly blind. She's mostly deaf. I don't know. It's hard to say. I wouldn't be able to tell anything was out of the ordinary from her, unfortunately, because she has a host of things that go on all the time. But people with hunting dogs, I've heard a lot of stories about people with hunting dogs who've been out in the woods, and they've reacted when people have had Bigfoot sightings. They've reacted with fear or protectiveness or things, not always aggressiveness, because supposedly they get the sense that this Bigfoot creature might be too much for them or a more serious threat, or even might be something that's not part of the world they know. I tend to trust the instincts of an animal. I would trust the instincts of an animal before I would trust the instincts of a person, to be fair. Because even domesticated, like my cats and my dog, they still have instincts that are closer to their primitive origins than ours. Ours have been kind of dulled down and desensitized, and all the other things we got going on in the world, all the EMF, whatever, everything that's going around. Our pets tend to still be closer to that because their systems they're on a different level than we are. It's a simpler path from here to there for them, whereas we have to go through all this other stuff in our brain to parse through that kind of thing. So I would trust that kind of thing. If any of you have stories about pets that you have had in the past who have alerted you that something was wrong, or have seen something and then you saw something afterwards, or just had some kind of paranormal experience, by all means, talk to me about it. If you're watching the show right now, drop it in the comments. If you see this after the fact on YouTube or wherever, drop a comment there, and we will be happy to follow up on that. I'd love to hear about it. There's a lot of things that animals know before the rest of us do. On ships, let me pull this up from James. He has a good comment. I trust their instincts 100%. I trust their instincts on all of these things. So even if I want to naturally be a skeptic on these things, I know that animals have seen more than I have, or they think there's something going on in there, and they're not as easily fooled as I am. They don't have an imagination like I do, so they're not going to come up with some fantastic explanation. They're just going to be like, something is wrong. I know something is wrong. Boom, A to B. Whereas my brain's like, oh, maybe it was this, or maybe it was a whiff of smoke, or maybe it was whatever. Maybe you drank too much or something. Animals don't have that problem. on ships for, I don't know, for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. People have allowed rats to stay on board because rats have such a high self-preservation instinct that they can tell when there's something wrong with the boat. They can tell when bad things are going to happen, and they flee. When you see the rats leaving the ship is going to sink, potentially. And so that's why they were allowed still to run free in the cargo holds of classic ships back in the day. When you go into the woods, have you ever gone into an area of woods? And there's a couple parts to this. First, I'm going to ask, have you gone like for a walk or a hike and you're just going on through and you're not paying too much attention, just going, and you hear the animal sounds and the insect sounds, and you make a bunch of noise, and briefly when you make a noise, like if you step on a branch or if you make like a clatter, you briefly hear silence for a minute because the animals and the insects are like, oh, what was that? And then usually it picks up within a few minutes after you've made your blunder, right? But have you also heard in times where maybe you're out there, you're camping or something, you're sitting around, maybe they're used to you, you've been out there a little while, they're used to you blundering around, or you're trying hard not to rile everything up, and then things get quiet. Despite everything that you do, things get quiet with no noticeable anything happening. And you sit and you wait, and it seems like it drags on. Like it starts making you nervous. Like you notice when all that sound is gone. And then eventually it picks up and everything's fine. So then you have to think, what happened? There was a danger sense. There was a sense of something in the area that all the wildlife would just don't draw attention. That's when you have to start thinking, what was just out here? What did I maybe just miss an encounter with? And people who've had Bigfoot encounters have said that the same thing happens before they have their sightings. Now, I haven't seen Bigfoot. I haven't seen anything particularly crazy in the forest in that way, but I have had those moments of silence out there. I've had moments where I've just been sitting on a log or just like hanging out, because I've camped a few times in my life or gone to places, and I've made a concerted effort to be quiet and not, rile up the natural order of things. I've had those moments where everything gets quiet. And you look around because you start feeling, you get the hairs on your arms are starting to stand up like there's something going on. Then eventually everything goes back normal, and you have to wonder, what did I miss? I've never seen anything, but I've had those moments, and I have to wonder to myself, what was out there? Was it just a normal predator? Was that maybe like a coyote coming through, or was there a bear passing through or something? It could have been, potentially. But you have to think that perhaps if it's something that's native to the area, then the other animals are going to be like, oh, whatever, and they're not going to worry about it so much. What they're reacting to is an intruder. And if it's not you, if everything was normal as you were tracing on through the forest, what was intruding? Animals know. Animals know. And it's always an interesting thing. Like I want to spend more time out in the woods. I would love to. I don't get that kind of time around here, and it's a little bit of travel to get to a nice quiet place. We have like metro parks and things around here, and Rob and I have gone to what's it called? Rogues Hollow. We've gone there, and we had a couple moments there where things just seemed like it was too quiet. And that's another thing too. That's another thing, James. People have, and this has been coming up more and more I'd say over the last 10 to 15 years. We talked to Chris George, who's the head of APRO, the Anubis Paranormal Research Organization. He is a former park ranger and a few other things. And he used to hear stories, and he saw this himself of what can only be described as the effect of the creature from the Predator movies with that camouflage that it uses. And he'd seen it, and he'd have other people tell him many times that they'd seen it. And there's things out there, and it's a funny story too. I'm not going to say that this is necessarily a thing. This could be just a bunch of us goofing off. But way back, 2005, way back, me and a bunch of my friends, we went to Ozfest, big heavy metal festival that used to tour the country, run by Ozzy Osbourne and his wife, and they're all the biggest metal bands of the day are usually there. Like we had Rob Zombie there the one year we went, and a few other ones. I'm not gonna throw out a bunch of names. I don't know how proficient anybody else out there in comment land is on legacy metal acts, but you don't go straight to the festival. You stay the night somewhere. At least we did. We went to this little campground on top of a hill overlooking the area below. It was like maybe 5-10 minutes away. You could see it from where we were. And there's not much up there. There's a couple of trees and things off to the side, but it's mostly clear and wide open, so you could park and whatever and set up your tents. And we were drinking, we were doing what we do. And one of my buddies, who's never been on the show, he would swear constantly he saw this one tree, and he would say, "Look, man, there's a predator up in that tree." And we all took it as a joke. We all took it as a joke because it's wide open. We're all drinking. We're all, having a good time. But then you wonder, once you get into some of this other stuff, and people have been seeing these things, maybe he saw something. I've never gone back to ask him about it again, because at the time it was like a joke, and now it's been what? That was 2005, so it's been 15, 18 years, almost 19 years, give or take. You might not even remember now, but people have been seeing things like that. And then you have to wonder, well, is that a creature? Or is that an individual with high technology? Or is it something from some other realm of the senses? Don't know. That's not the focus of this show. But it is an interesting point that people have been seeing those. And when you're out there in the woods will react. The forest animals, the life out there will react to things like that before you notice it, because your senses are dulled. Unless you're a person who goes out in the woods all the time and you're a woodsman, a constant, if that's 70% of your life. And that's a good point. People do get like that, and people are like, I ain't seen nothing. But you got to pay attention, especially if you're out in the woods. Especially, we're so used to being here in the city and thinking, okay, I got to watch out. I got to make sure I'm not being followed so my car doesn't get broken into or someone doesn't want to steal my wallet or thing. And you have a sense of, I look out for a different kind of security here in town compared to what I do in the woods. It's tempting to think, oh, yeah, we got no crime out in the woods. We got nothing out there. We can go out there and just walk around and roam around, whatever. But it's a whole different world out there, both physically and on a spiritual level. There's different things happening out there. Some places you go to, and there's animals that genetically, not the same animal, obviously, but through its family line, as a species, have lived in those woods longer than you have been around, and longer than your family has been around, longer than maybe any of you were even on in this country. There's genetic lines of animals out there that have lived here so long, and they've seen so many things and passed down so many things through the genetic code. They've evolved certain ways to know when some things are natural and some things are not. And you haven't. Kind of. I mean, we have to a certain extent, but we're city folk, we're townsfolk. Unless again you live off the grid for most of your life on purpose, then you're not going to know to look for these kind of stuff. And some of those folks can be pretty rough, but they also know what they're doing, and they don't like talking about that stuff either. They don't like talking about, oh yeah, when the woods get quiet. No, they keep to themselves because they're like, hey, you know what? We don't mess with the stuff that's out there, and they won't mess with us. Whereas us townsfolk are like, oh, I want to go find Bigfoot. You know, I have a bit more respect than that, of course. I know a lot of people that watch the show have a bit more respect than that, but still, that's the kind of the overall attitude. Because you got like the ghost hunters, ghost adventures, all this other stuff, finding Bigfoot, and everybody's like, oh, let's go out there and find them, and it's like maybe not, maybe just leave them alone. Distinct relative of the domestic dog, which is the wolf. Wolves have had a connection with the supernatural and the paranormal for a long time. We have so many legends of werewolves for one, but even if you take that out of the picture, wolves were supposedly, they at one point people believed they served the devil and they rode with the wild hunt, and if you were caught outside they'd get you and they'd drag away your soul. And wolves were often shot on sight because, for one, they'd steal your livestock, but for another, it was believed that they were evil. Yeah, a good number. When it becomes entertaining, it devalues it to the point that it's not serious anymore for a lot of us. So, but wolves have always kind of had a bad rap. Yes, they can be vicious, and they're very territorial. They're also very smart, and they're very in tune with the natural world. They're very in tune with it. And when people would move into the wilder areas, the wolves would be like, "Hey, you know what? You're bringing these other animals in here. We see that. We see that they're not going to be able to get away from us because they don't know about us. That these are these cow things. We're going to go get them. These sheep. Yeah, we're going to go get them." It's a natural instinct for a wolf. But we demonized them. We demonized wolves, and made a good job of eradicating a lot of the wolf populations to the point where most of them were endangered species, which is a shame, because they serve an important function in the wilds at keeping certain of the grazing populations from just going out of control. So, coyotes. We deal with coyotes here. Coyotes have a similar reputation. Coyotes are such a common enough thing, even here in town in Canton, Ohio, that people will constantly be like, hey, you know what? Yeah, there was supposedly a coyote, keep your pets indoors, this and that. And there's like everybody's all nonchalant about it because we've moved into their territory. But coyotes were from the Native Americans connected to the spirit world. In fact, Coyote himself was a trickster deity, or a trickster spirit, depending on how you call the Native American stories, that they dealt with many times. The fox in Japan is known to fulfill a similar function, a trickster deity with multiple tails. The kitsune in Japan. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly because I'm not the Japanese speaker on the show here. If he was here, he'd either confirm or deny that I said that correctly. But the fox is supposed to have a connection to the spirit world, and that's become such a thing that it's in a lot more of our pop culture too. Like my daughter, one of her favorite animals is the fox. She loves the fox, and almost every single game that she plays on our game console that has a fox somewhere as a character, almost every single case, it has the ability to pass into a spirit realm and have a spirit form and do things on a spiritual level. Why is that? Because we have this ancient connection with this thought that the fox is connected to the world of the spirits. And it's so interesting. And you have to think about how far back we as a species have interacted with these animals and how long we had to observe the way that they acted to get this idea that they had these connections. Because you don't just see an animal or a bird and believe, oh, that's a tool of the devil, whatever. It has to be doing something. It has to be interacting in a behavior of some kind. And the more times you see it do that behavior, you're like, that seems different. That seems strange. There must be a reason for it, but I don't understand the reason. So, of course, it must be something involving something beyond my senses. That's how people might have thought at the time. And so it started becoming part of the racial memory that we have. And stay away from them because when they do this, it means this is happening. And it's built in, it's coded into us. It's a similar thing with big cats. Like we have in Africa, they've got the lions. In India, you got tigers, and you've got like some places that have leopards and whatnot. In Central America, you had jaguars, and the Mayans and the Aztecs and the Inca, they all revered the jaguar in a very similar way to how the Egyptians uh, revered the domestic cat. But everything about Central American ancient culture was violence as opposed to any form of like gentle like companionship. Whereas the Egyptians, they portrayed the domestic cat as a protector. The Central American religions saw the jaguar as potentially, yes, a protector against other evil spirits, but also vengeance and also like don't overstep your bounds because Jaguar is going to get you. Jaguar was vicious and bloodthirsty, and jaguars can be like that. They don't have a lot of fear. They'll hunt down people just as much as they'll hunt down other animals if they think they can get away with it. And so it's another example of a creature from the natural world exhibiting things that frighten us, that shock us, that like we don't understand. We don't know why they're so aggressive. We even though we're in their territory and we're building and we're pressing inward, causing them to lose food sources. So naturally, but from their perspective, they see this creature stalking the jungles and taking away people at will, and so they construct these legends. And like I said, the jaguar is another one. Now, looking at some other things, I'm gonna try to get comfortable here. You have various stories about animals being smarter, and another one is birds. Let's get to birds. Okay. Crows. Crows are supposed to signify that there's an approaching disaster or an approaching death in a family or in an area. If you see the crows start gathering because they're scavenger birds, then the assumption is that either someone has passed or someone's going to pass, or there's going to be a large amount of violent death. Um, as opposed to vultures, which usually show up because they've already, like, oh, hey, there's something going on down there. Tasty. Crows show up more like ahead of the fact. Like they'll show up and be like, nothing's happened yet, but something's gonna. Um, and ravens. Now, ravens and crows are different. They have a lot of similarities, but they are different. Ravens are extremely intelligent. They can recognize individual people the way that, like, a pet can, and they will interact with you on a level where they know who you are. And if you've, I don't want to say necessarily shown them respect, but if you've treated them well, they will show up and expect the same treatment. I've seen plenty of mundane stories about people who've, oh yeah, we had a raven that used to come around my house. We'd leave food out for it, and it would come out and wait all the time. It wouldn't bother us for it. It would just wait and get like a snack, and then it'd do its own thing, and it would hang out with us. They're very smart, and if you do something that they don't like if you try to give them food and then you pull it back and like try to trick them, then they will play tricks on you, which sounds kind of like it's a raven, right? It's just a bird. But remember, birds have been around for a very, very, very long time. Birds, of course, used to be dinosaurs. Scientific fact, as far as our understanding, you know, I don't ever want to say the science is settled because that thing always drives me crazy, especially the last few years. The science is settled. No, it isn't, because science is never settled. But to our current understanding, birds were dinosaurs. And the dinosaurs, it's turned out, have been smarter and smarter the more we figured them out. Because, I mean, you don't have a living dinosaur to see. But the more we study about the bone structure and the brain structure and things like that, you're like, things are not what we expected. They're not slow, sluggish, kind of not too bright going up in here. They're highly intelligent. They hunted in packs and they raised families, and birds are very smart, and some of them are extremely smart with good memories. And because they have been around as a species for such a very long time, that genetic code has been tweaked and tweaked and tweaked to help them survive for this long. You got to know there's more going on. They used to say, and they made movies about it, like, of course, the movie The Crow. They said that crows would show up to carry the soul to the spirit world. However true that is, who knows? But it jives with things like the Valkyries from Viking mythology. And for the Vikings, you'd have both crows and you'd have the Valkyries. And if you were particularly honorable in your death or whatever like that, if you'd gone out in battle the way that you were supposed to and you'd honored your ancestors, then the Valkyries would carry you off, whereas the crows would just take off your soul to wherever else you were supposed to go. And Odin had two ravens that one was thought and one was memory, and they would sit on his shoulders and they would communicate with him. Hugin and Mugen, or something like that. I'm not saying it right, I know. I'm just pulling names from memory. So we have a long history of animals interacting with the paranormal and in supernatural in ways that we can't. And some of it is a little overdone. Like, I don't expect every single bird out there to be, waiting for me to die to carry my soul off somewhere. I don't expect everything my cat sees in the house that I don't see it to be some kind of a spirit or interdimensional creature. I don't expect anytime a dog is nervous that, oh yeah, something bad is definitely going to happen. It just could be a nervous dog. But there are these signs, and you should pay attention to them because your pet specifically may know things that you don't. And the evidence is there. Like, again, the one article about dogs was written by a guy with a PhD for Psychology Today, which is not just some fringe publication. Whether you believe anything that they put out or not, that's up to you. I don't often take things from NBC and MSN and CNN and Fox and whatever and instantly be like, oh, yeah, well, that's a good news source. Always got to back up your sources, always got to look up things. But Psychology Today is a pretty, it deals with psychology and things. So, interesting stuff. Once again, if you are seeing this broadcast right now and you have a story, put it in the comments. If you are seeing this broadcast after the fact on YouTube, on demand, wherever, or on Facebook or whatever, then by all means, tell me your story in the comments after the fact. I'll go back and I'll check out the comments after the video's over. I would love to see if you have any paranormal stories. Now, some animal species aren't really known necessarily to have paranormal stuff per se. As far as the oceans go, fish are pretty one-track mind for the most part. Fish and sharks and that kind of stuff. Dolphins are supposed to be incredibly intelligent, but whether they have anything from a spiritual level, it's hard to say. Old stories say they used to help guide shipwrecked sailors to land and things like that, but that could just be helpful. That doesn't necessarily mean that they like want to preserve your spirit or something like that. We have a lot of cryptid stuff in the oceans, and there are a lot of things that we don't understand, like the giant squid we're just figuring out, over the last like few decades. The crocodile, as far as like river creatures and lake creatures, the crocodile and the alligator were also revered by the Egyptians and by ancient cultures, and around the same time as the dinosaurs. But whether they had any sort of supernatural, connection, it's harder to see. Insects, again, insects seem to be pretty one-dimensional, so we don't know. But again, that's another thing. We don't know because of what they seem like to us. We can only really base most of our observations on the animals that we've come to trust on a different level of intelligence, which is like the dogs and the cats and things. But getting back to the cattle mutilations, I want to make sure I cover this before I close today, because that's an interesting thing. That is something that is still happening today. It was noted, at least as far as our culture noticed it, from the 40s on with the UFO craze and things like that. But it probably happened much sooner than that. We just didn't ascribe like a reason to it. Now we assume, oh, it's got to be aliens or it's got to be satanic cultists or things like that. But it's something that still happens. And we still don't have concrete explanations for why. And I think that's important. I think that's important. Because since we have a beef industry and we have all these things, we have seen animals that have been killed in natural ways or even unnatural ways by us for food. And it just seems like the mutilation stuff, it doesn't have a reason. It doesn't, and it's not like somebody took the cow and like had an autopsy in the middle of the field. Because even that stuff, there's regulated. You pull this there, you pull this there, you do this, you observe this, whatever. A vivisection, which is very similar to an autopsy on an animal. We don't have that. We have instead, oh, maybe all the skin's gone from its face, or maybe all this part of its body is missing, or all this, and it doesn't seem to be from an animal attack. It doesn't even, and it's grotesque, but I'm interested. Why specifically these herd animals? Why specifically you get these mutilations from primarily cows and sheep? I've heard of sheep mutilations and things, and I think there's an important point to that because um, I'd be interested in hearing that. I'd be interested in hearing that. These are all animals that are raised by humans for something that's not usually for being pets. They're either used for meat or for milk or for wool from the sheep and whatnot. And I think there's something there that we're missing. There's a lot of theories I can come up with. I'd love to hear other people's theories, like James in the chat. I'd love to hear that because it's anything goes. Um, and you don't, like, people keep chickens and people keep other things on their farms, and you don't often hear about mutilations to those animals so much. You do once in a while hear about, oh, look, local cult members stole somebody's chicken and took it out in the woods and did a pagan sacrifice and things, which isn't as often these days. I mean, these days, if people try stuff like that, it's mostly for shock value. But cows and sheep, for whatever reason, it can't just be because somebody was hungry, because all that stuff's in the supermarket. It's be a lot easier to get in and steal a package of ground beef than try to go through all of the effort and potentially be caught to do that to somebody's animal. I don't know. It's one of those things, and people don't. It's such a mystery, and people kind of gloss over it all the time now. They're all like, "Oh yeah, it can't possibly have been aliens or this or whatever. It's just a wild animal." But it doesn't seem to be. It's like one of those uncanny valley situations where it's like it seems like such a simple thing on the surface, and it jives, and you're like, okay, that makes sense, but you just can't help that there's something wrong about it. That there's something not right, and it bothers you. And that's a good idea too. I'm a very skeptical person. I'm not a very religious person, but I think there's different energies in the world, and we used to feed different energies one way that we're not doing now. And potentially, because like cattle sacrifice and sheep and things, those were pretty big back in the days when we were making big sacrifices to sun gods and things. It's a valid theory. It's a valid theory, and we could be just too blind to what's really going on with that. We might lack the intuitive sense to understand what we're seeing. Yeah, I put as much stock into that as I would put into anything else. I would say it's at least as valid as any other idea. I wouldn't laugh at it. So we're at the last 5 minutes or so, and rather than drag it out because I'm by myself, you guys know me. I'll probably cut out a few minutes early. I hope you enjoyed my discussion tonight. I'm trying to make more of an effort on my solo shows to be better prepared for things. Um, and that is a pretty good point. That is something that I had not considered. That's something that I had not considered. So I'm going to have to keep that filed away. That's very interesting. Um, yeah, I'm trying to put a little bit more thought and effort into these solo shows that I have to do every so often to make sure they're still entertaining and we're all on the same page. Because I know the last one I did, I was having a rough time. I was going through a kind of like depressive funk kind of thing, and I was letting a lot of things in my life kind of just go while I was dealing with that. But I'm back in the groove now. I've got things moving on. It happens to all of us, and fired up. And I'm going to see about rejuvenating some of this stuff, get back into the interesting topics, and get back into the highly good research and whatnot. So, but that's all I have for you. Um, Today's Friday, so my schedule for how I release things is kind of all over the place now. I took a break from everything, so now rather than sticking to Spirits Club on this day and streaming on this day and streaming on this day, I'm putting up videos whenever. If you're subscribed to Spider Does Things here on YouTube, then you'll get notified when I have new content up, or you can just always go check. I usually have a new video every day or every couple of days. There's plenty of stuff there. I'm trying to boost my viewer count, so please subscribe. Even if you're like, you know what, I don't really like watching stuff on YouTube, subscribe anyway, and then just never check it. That's okay. They'll leave you up there for the most part. I mean, every so often they'll clear out inactive subscribers, but for the most part they'll leave it there, and every little single one helps. So on YouTube, Spider Does Things. YouTube.com. Is this a slash or a backslash or I don't know. You know how websites work, right? At Spider Does Things. I know Rob has been talking about his theological show. I have not touched base with him on that, so I don't know how far along he is on that. That's his own thing. There's a month off from the Let's Talk About This audio podcast that'll be coming back January 1st for New Year's Day, and that will be the topic. New Year's Day. Might as well, right? Until then, it was good seeing everyone here. James, always good to have you in the chat room. You gave me some stuff to think about here at the end now. Now the old gears are turning because that's a pretty good, that's something I hadn't noticed before. So, thank you for being here. Thanks everyone for watching. I will see you folks next time.